Girl Undercover Episode 7, written by Julia Derrick. That dude seems like a lot of trouble, Dante said, referring to Ian. You can say that again, I said into my smartphone from where I sat curled up on the couch in my living room. I was back home and just had to talk about all that had happened with someone I could trust. Someone I could use as a sounding board who at the same time would nourish my exhausted soul. How much more stress would I be able to handle before I broke down? I especially wanted to discuss the fact that it looked like Ian was texting me all those nasty messages and what I could do about it. I didn't have many choices, but even under different circumstances, I think I still would have called Dante. In addition to being Latino like me, Dante was a former gangbanger with 10 years of experience in the criminal underworld. As scared as I was at the moment, I needed to explore all possibilities. An ex-Latin Devils member had no problems thinking outside the box and was also intimately familiar with the minds of true psychopaths. More and more, it was looking like Ian might be one. I sighed. I don't know what to believe any longer. I mean, how big is the likelihood it's someone living in the same building? Pretty much zero, right? It's gotta be Ian fucking with me. Sounds like it to me. But the funny thing is my gut keeps telling me Ian isn't a bad guy, and that's totally throwing me off. Each time I think about him being out to get me, do things like those done to the victims, my stomach twists with pain like I'm so wrong. Maybe it's that time of the month. Ricky is always bitching like crazy about how much her stomach hurts then. There was a slight pause. Don't tell her I said that. Don't worry, my lips are sealed, I replied and laughed. I heard Ricky's voice in my head, complaining about how badly her stomach bothered her around her period. I used to train Dante's wife back in LA. Before becoming a cop, knowing how she could go on and on about this, I couldn't blame him for bringing it up. But the pain in my own stomach was different, more subtle, not unlike how I'd felt about Nick when I first got to know him. Back then, I had not been as good at judging what my gut was trying to tell me. I had been in love with Nick and thought the only reason I felt so strongly he was a good man, despite being a thug, was because I wanted him to be. It turned out that Nick had been the most incredible man I'd ever met. I quickly pushed away thoughts of my dead husband. There was no time for me to miss him right now. I needed to figure out what was going on. What was really going on? No, I told Dante. I wish I could tell you I'm like Ricky, but I'm not. This has nothing to do with that time of the month. My gut's definitely trying to tell me something, and I don't think it's something good. How about I come over there for a month or so until you've figured it out? I can act as your secret bodyguard. It sounds like you need someone to watch over you. Ricky will understand if I tell her it's got something to do with you. A pleasant wave of warmth streamed through me. That's so sweet of you, but I can't take you away from your family. Dante and Ricky had just gotten their first kid, an adorable boy who was now 5 months old and the spitting image of his father with his dark locks, olive skin, and wise black eyes. Gabi, if your life is on the line, my family can spare me for a few weeks. Okay, good to know. But I think for now I'll be okay on my own, really. If that changes, I'll let you know. But what are you gonna do? Just wait until this freak does something to you. Based on all you've told me, it's only a matter of time before that happens. I'm not buying he's really a good guy, no matter what your gut's trying to tell you. The evidence is too damned strong. I know. I sighed again. It's very confusing. Dante exhaled, sounding exasperated. Listen, Chica. I know you're a big girl, but this one might be too much even for you. You've been under tremendous stress lately, which means your gut's probably off. You can't just play things by ear and hope for the best. You're right. I can't. And I won't. A plan had begun to occur to me, quickly becoming clearer in my mind. I have a plan. Really? What's your plan? If you don't have one, I'm coming over there, I chuckled at the determination in his voice. It was sweet and exactly what I needed to hear right now. I was not alone. If I needed help here in NYC, all I needed to do was call Dante or George, both equally important to me for different reasons. But I knew what to do now. It was really quite simple. I'm just going to ask him straight out why he's sending me those sick texts. Tell him I'm on to him, and that I'll go to the cops and turn him in if he doesn't cut it out. What? How's that going to help? He'll never buy you'll do that when he knows how much you want to find Nick's killers. You have more to lose than him. He'll blow your cover. I won't actually go to the police. But whether I do or not, I'll still get what I want. I don't think he's so good he'll be able to play stupid if I suddenly confront him. I'll be able to tell if he did it. That's probably true. You should be able to tell by his reaction if he did it. It's not a bad idea. Just make sure you do it somewhere public in case he throws a fit. I doubt he'll throw a fit. He's not the type to do such a thing. I wasn't nearly as sure about that as I'd made myself sound. For all I knew, Ian might very well throw a fit. Maybe not. Still, make sure there are others around when you do it. You don't really know this guy. Don't take any chances. I won't. We spoke more about him and Ricky and everyone else back in LA before we hung up. I stretched out on the couch, feeling a lot better after having spoken to Dante. I knew he'd have such a relaxing effect on me. I'd also known I would come up with a solution to the situation with Ian while talking to him. I would definitely confront the Brit as soon as I got a chance. The following morning I had Channel 1 on in the background as I was getting ready to go to work. As expected, New York City's 24-hour news station spent several minutes on the latest developments in the Upper West Side rape wave. Well, the final development. Instead of looking for the rapist, the NYPD was now on the hunt for the mysterious woman who had saved the last victim and shot the elusive sex offender. Again, there was that bad sketch of me on the screen, reinforcing my confidence I had nothing to worry about. It looked so little like me. Though I would definitely make it a point never to wear a baseball cap anywhere in public from now on. At least not a Red Sox one. Pulling on my black tights, I sat on the edge of my couch and took in what the anchor was reporting regarding the dead rapist. His name was Jeremy Perez, and he was a 31-year-old PhD student from New Jersey with no criminal record. He was single with no children and few friends. He was an only child and his parents were both dead, having emigrated from Mexico many years ago. The rest of Jeremy's family was apparently all back in Mexico still. There was no mention of how he had managed to outwit the NYPD for so long, nor how he had gotten into the buildings of the victims. Nothing about the perp having climbed the wall like Spider-Man, and certainly nothing about a potential accomplice still being out there. I'd have to ask Ian about what was in the police report regarding Jeremy Perez. Surely the NYPD must have found out from the doorman that I'd seen the perp climb into the bedroom from outside the building. Not that I thought they'd state that he had climbed the wall like Spider-Man, that he possessed unnatural powers, but instead write it off like I had simply thought I'd seen it, which was understandable. Not even I was sure I believed that's what really happened despite having seen it with my own eyes. As time went on, the less convinced I became. It had been dark out, so my eyes could have played a trick on me. That seemed more likely than Jeremy Perez being a human spider. When the newscast moved on to a fire in Queens, I stood up and found my sneakers. In a few hours, I would see Ian for a session, and then I would for sure learn more about the man I had shot and killed. I had no doubts Ian had already devoured the latest police report. I had decided not to confront him about the texts until I had learned everything there was to learn about Jeremy Perez, read the police reports written about him with my own eyes. I would definitely not just take Ian's words for what was in them. To read them, I would need to be in Ian's apartment. Something told me he wouldn't mind having me there again. The moment we had shared after finishing dinner at his house a few days ago returned to me, and all of a sudden I was warm and mushy on the inside, delirious like I was high on drugs. I could almost feel his hot breath against my mouth, an inch away from mine. I remembered how much I had wanted him to kiss me, and how hard it had been to remove myself from him in his hallway, open the door, and leave. I sighed and shook myself to make those disturbing feelings go away. I really was fucked up, being so attracted to thugs and men who might be out to hurt me. I welcomed the chilly breeze that met me as I stepped out of my apartment building, the cold drizzle that hit my face as I walked along Columbus Avenue. It was just what I needed to distract myself from more thoughts of Ian about to kiss me. As I got closer to Nikkei, my plan to confront him had morphed into a better one. It was smarter to be subtle about the texts first, pretend like I thought someone else, perhaps a disgruntled male in my life, was harassing me, and see how Ian reacted. If that didn't yield anything, I could always confront him as initially planned. I wasn't a bad actress. I could easily pull off acting like I was convinced the person texting me was some weirdo I'd refused to train, and therefore had an axe to grind. The more I considered doing this, the more content I was having thought of it. I would carefully watch Ian's facial expressions as I did so, and maybe I'd learn additional useful information about him, things I hadn't expected. At this point, I was prepared for anything. I was glad I had a few hours before I would see him, so I could fine-tune how to break the news about the texts. I'd roamed the floors at the club before, which would allow me plenty of time to think. I would also talk to more people to see if I could finally learn something new to help my own, seriously stalled investigation. I didn't learn anything new in regards to my own investigation. It was beginning to get on my nerves. Really, the only lead I'd gotten so far was what Ian had told me about Adler, and that didn't count for much for obvious reasons. He was already waiting for me when I came out of the trainer's lounge a couple of minutes before noon, the time we had decided to train. Wearing a blue t-shirt and dark athletic shorts, he was leaning against the fitness desk, looking like any other guy at the gym. Well, one of the better-looking ones. Ian was definitely one of the club's hotties, and that said a lot about him, considering that most of the current trainers were drop-dead gorgeous. But Ian had a certain air about him, an air of old money and aristocracy, that set him apart from the trainers. He was one of a kind, for better or for worse. He turned around to face me just as I was about to say hello. He hadn't bothered to shave for the last couple of days, resulting in him having a thin beard now. It made me think of the first time I saw him in the cafeteria, glowering at me. Scruffy beard or not, he still appeared as blue-blooded as always, I noted, and attractive. "Well, hello there," he said, and smiled wide. I returned his smile, automatically repressing the annoying excitement that suddenly shot through me. "Hi, how are you? Have you recovered from our last workout?" "Yeah, I'm feeling great and ready to push it today. Whatever you want me to do, I'm game." "Let's go down to the third floor," I said, and began walking in that direction. He joined me and we descended the stairs together. I was about to tell him that I had received some very nasty texts lately, but before I could get the words out of my mouth, he spoke in a quiet voice. "I read the final police report about Jeremy Perez this morning. Want to know what it said?" "Yes, of course." I threw a glance behind me just to make sure we were alone. We were. The detective filing it claims he used hooks to get up the building, and that was how he got into the other two high-rises as well. I turned to look at Ian. Hooks? Was he kidding me? It certainly hadn't looked that way. "It's true," he confirmed. "It's obviously a lie, but you already knew that. You're welcome to come over to my place and read the report for yourself." "I would love to do that. When can I come?" "How about tonight?" I thought about what my evening looked like and quickly concluded that I had nothing on my schedule. "Okay, I'll come over tonight. I can bring some takeout since you cooked dinner last time." I wasn't sure why I had offered that, but it was too late now. Ian grinned. Sounds like an excellent idea. What would you like? Maybe sushi? Sushi would be great. I'll make sure we have some sake to wash it down with. That is, I'll be washing it down with some sake at least. You can watch me while I do it. He nudged me. I might have a sip as well, I said, just to humor him. You know, to celebrate that we got the bastard. What did the NYPD say about me? Something I should worry about? Not really. There isn't much said about you except that you're a woman in your early 20s, about 5'8" and 130 pounds. I know a man shouldn't ask a woman's age, but I don't think you're in your early 20s any longer. Am I correct? That's okay. I'm not. I'm in my late 20s now. But I guess me wearing gym clothes together with the Red Sox hat made me appear younger. And that's a good thing. It sure is. We entered the third floor. A moment of silence ensued. Now was as good a time as any to bring up the nasty texts, but I would make him warm up first. I told him to grab the TRX strap handles and start moving. When he was about 5 repetitions into the set, I spoke in a low voice, as there were some trainers working with clients only a few feet away. The music coming from the gym's loudspeakers was pretty loud, so I felt safe talking about it. Oh, I forgot to tell you. I've been getting some weird texts lately. Nasty texts. I watched him carefully as he lowered himself to the ground and then pulled himself back up again, using the TRX straps. If he had any idea what I was talking about, it wasn't visible on his face. He merely gazed at me with a blank look. What do you mean? I've received 3 texts threatening me from an unknown phone number. Ian frowned, the picture of innocence. Interesting. Maybe he was as good an actor as my friend Nina back in LA. Threatening you, how he asked, sounding sincerely interested. Basically telling me I was going to be the rapist's next victim. At first I was pretty sure it was from the rapist himself, but I couldn't figure out how he'd gotten my number. Ian stopped moving. When did you receive the first text? I didn't tell you to stop moving, did I? I gave him a playful yet challenging look. He started squatting again. I got it the night you told me to come with you to Belinda Jones's apartment building. Why didn't you tell me about it then? He had me momentarily thrown, but I soon found my composure. I didn't think it was important. I also thought it might have something to do with a disgruntled client of mine. A disgruntled client. Yeah. A day before we went to that building, I did a training session with a guy who was so sleazy I refused to see him again for another session. Really, Ian looked very interested all of a sudden. Really? I received another text shortly after I'd shot Perez, which means it couldn't have been him texting me. So I'm thinking it's that weirdo guy I trained. He has my number and a reason to do it? I'm sorry, Ian said, and looked genuinely sorry. Want me to kick his arse for you? No, I replied. All I want you to do is a set of chest presses on those straps. I'll take care of this freak myself. As you please. Ian immediately started doing the exercise I wanted him to do, not looking bothered at all by what I had just told him. Well, I guess I have no choice but to confront him about the texts after all, I thought. It was the only way to get to the bottom of this. My stomach was in knots as I waited for Ian to buzz me into his brownstone. I was determined to find out if he was behind those texts, one way or another. After today's session, I didn't know what to think. His behavior had made me doubt he had anything to do with them, but how was that possible? I didn't think George had been wrong when looking up the number the second time, not after I told him what the text had regarded. He wasn't a sloppy person. Well, when I left Ian tonight, I would know the truth. The buzzer sounded and I pulled open the heavy door. A minute later, I set foot on the 5th floor where Ian lived, out of breath like the first time I'd ascended those long, steep stairs. But tonight, I didn't care to try to hide it. Hey, I gasped, slipping past him as he held his apartment door for me to enter. Walking into his living room, I plopped down on one of the bar stools along the marble island that separated the small kitchen from the living area. His gray cat was curled up on that same armchair again, giving me a lazy look before returning back to La La Land. Ian was soon next to me. I handed him the plastic bag with the sushi I'd picked up for us. "Would you like some water?" he asked with an almost concerned look on his face. "Sure, that would be nice," I replied, able to speak more or less normally now. He came over with a tall glass filled with water. Giving him a grateful smile, I took it and had a few sips. He sat on the stool in front of me and gazed at me. I noted that his thin beard was gone. "Those stairs are a killer, aren't they?" he commented. "Yeah, it would be great if you had an elevator." I chugged the rest of the water. Agreed. "Are you ready for some sake? I have some heated up already." I knew it was a bad idea for me to say yes, but at the same time I thought it would be rude if I refused it when he'd gone through the trouble to not only get the sake but also prepare it. So I smiled and said, "Sure, that would be nice." He walked around the island and soon returned with 2 small white porcelain cups filled to the brim with warm liquid. I took it from him and raised it to propose a toast. "To catching the Upper West Side rapist," I said. Ian did the same, holding my gaze all the while. "And to you being here tonight celebrating this occasion with me. It means a lot to me." I lowered my cup to ask him exactly what he meant, but the way he was looking at me, like me sitting there in front of him, really did mean a lot to him, made the words get stuck in my throat. The air between us was suddenly electric. It became so full of tension. A sharp sound coming from my smartphone that I'd placed on the marble top interrupted the quickly escalating moment. Someone had sent me a text. Grateful for the distraction, I reached for my phone to see who had contacted me. As I lowered my gaze toward my hands, I could feel that Ian was still contemplating me in that intimate manner. It made me terribly nervous. So nervous I dropped the phone. Ian shot up from his stool. "Let me get it?" He sank down to his feet and returned 2 seconds later, holding my phone in his hand. As I took it from him, I met his gaze again. His chameleon eyes had turned dark like the night, practically burning into me. I was suddenly aware that I was playing with fire having come to his house. The fact that my gun was in a holster at the back of my hip, safely hidden under my baggy sweater, was little protection. I should get to those police reports as quickly as possible, then find a way to convince Ian to go somewhere with me, where there were lots of people so I could ask him about the texts. It would be stupid to do it with just the 2 of us here in his apartment, where the walls were so thick he could do whatever he wanted to me without anyone hearing. Dante was right, I didn't know this guy well at all. I put the phone down on the marble top, face down. "Aren't you going to see who contacted you?" he asked, frowning lightly. "Nope. I already know who it is. And I don't feel like being bothered at the moment. It was true, all I wanted was for us to start reading the police reports. I was in no hurry to find out who was texting me." "Then, why did you pick it up?" I had no idea what to say to that. "You think it's that same person who sent you those other texts, don't you?" His question was so natural, so full of concern. I just couldn't believe the man in front of me would ever send me those threatening texts, never mind hurt me in any way. "Maybe," I said, straightening in my seat. I cleared my throat. "But it doesn't matter. As I told you earlier, I'll take care of it. Forget that I even brought it up." "Until I bring it up later?" That is, I thought. How about we take a look at the police reports regarding Jeremy? He jerked a little, like I had just flicked his shoulder with my fingers. Then he also cleared his throat and squared his shoulders. "Sure, let's have a look." He walked over to a round side table in a corner and picked up his laptop. Returning, He placed the laptop on the island counter beside me and opened it. "Here we go," he said, and pulled up the report I had requested. "I'll get plates and chopsticks for us to use for the sushi." I turned to get a better view of the computer screen. It didn't take me many minutes before I had absorbed all that had been written about Jeremy Perez on the NYPD servers. Everything Ian had told me was true. He unpacked the big dish of assorted sushi I had gotten and handed me a plate and a folded napkin, as well as chopsticks. I gazed down at the long wooden sticks in my hand. Could I have a fork instead? I waved the chopsticks awkwardly, then put them aside. I had never learned how to eat with chopsticks, and I wasn't planning on ever learning either. Why eat with long sticks when it was so much easier to eat with a fork? Ian smiled at me. "Sure. Now that I think about it, I actually prefer a fork over chopsticks myself, though I've never admitted that to anyone before." "Good for you that you finally did. Must be liberating." "Yes, it is." Ian was soon seated, the two of us eating the sushi, using forks instead of chopsticks. Thankfully, he was quiet for once, allowing me to think. I needed to come up with something to get him to come with me to a public place so I could confront him. But despite the silence, my brain stood still. I had a feeling the light tension that lingered in the air had something to do with it. The cup of sake was still just sitting there beside me. I didn't dare touch it. As much chemistry as we had between us, I didn't trust myself with even a little alcohol in my system. I had yet to forget how I'd once let myself go with Nick while under the influence. "What did you think of the police report?" Ian asked, as I was finally beginning to relax, and it seemed my brain was working again. I forced myself not to grimace with annoyance. "Well, there isn't much to say. I didn't learn anything besides what you'd already relayed to me." "What do you think of the fact they claimed Perez used steel hooks to climb that building?" I shrugged. "Maybe that's what he did. It was dark out. I might have missed them." Ian's face twisted with disbelief. "Come on, Gabi. You don't really believe that. You know as well as I do they made it up just to have something to say. They'll never admit they still have no idea how he got into those high rises." Okay, he had me there. I was well aware how prideful law enforcement officials could be. "That may be true," I said, "but it doesn't matter. I still don't know what it was I really saw. I refuse to believe he was only using his bare hands and feet to get up that smooth stone wall. He must have used something." "No, he doesn't." Ian turned grave-looking. "I'm telling you, Gabi, he's not a normal human being. He's some kind of hybrid." "Right. Well, I guess only time will tell who's right, you or me." Something struck me then. Hadn't Ian told me all these superhumans were supposed to be extremely good-looking? Yes, he had. Well, Jeremy Perez hadn't been particularly good-looking. At best average, now that I pictured him in my head. I told Ian my thoughts. "I did notice that he wasn't the best-looking bloke ever," Ian replied. "But that doesn't mean he isn't an escaped product of the labs. He was 31 years old. Someone as old as he was is likely part of the initial experiments in which they only promoted certain qualities. And even if he isn't part of the initial tests, you should know that not all hybrids are perfect. I'm sorry that I might have made it seem that way. Yes, ideally they want everyone to be gorgeous and super smart, but it will take some time before that goal is reached. At the moment, some hybrids are only exceptional in certain aspects. The fact that he was able to climb buildings using only his hands and feet is enough to tell me he has to be some kind of hybrid." "Well, as long as that is what he actually did, he might be. Again, I'm not sure." Ian shook his head. "I guess it will take you meeting another hybrid with unnatural capabilities to finally believe me." "Yes, I guess it will. Maybe even a few of them." I grabbed my fork that I had put down and began eating the sushi again. I needed to finish dinner so I could get out of there. It was getting late, and I had yet to think of a place outside Ian's apartment where there were lots of people. I'd taken care of a good chunk of what I'd come for, like verifying that Ian's story corresponded to the one in the police report. I could confront him about the texts when I saw him for training next. Really, what was the hurry? My phone sounded again, announcing another incoming message. I remembered then that I had promised to confirm a session with a new client the next day. Maybe it was she who had texted me earlier. I should check. I put my plate aside and reached for my phone. My eyes widened as I stared down at the most recent text. "Is it him again?" Ian asked, his voice tense. I nodded slowly, reading the 2 sentences over and over. "It's going to be a slow, painful death, and I'm going to enjoy every moment of it. I'm literally going to fuck your brains out." "Can I see it?" Ian asked. I checked who had sent me the first text and saw that it was from the new client. Then I handed my phone to Ian. His face darkened and his nostrils flared as he read the text. He shook his head slowly, handing me back the phone. "Sick fuck," he hissed through clenched teeth. His face was so tight, I was convinced he simply couldn't have anything to do with these texts, even if I knew it was possible to program a computer to send me texts any time. But I just didn't believe he was this good an actor. The man before me was furious, genuinely furious. "Have you tried to call the number?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, of course." "And what happened?" "It said the number is no longer working." "Well, obviously it is, which means it's probably sent from a computer." "That's what I'm thinking too." I didn't see the need to tell Ian exactly how I had arrived at this conclusion, or that I knew his computer was involved. He put down his fork and got to his feet. He walked over to a corner of his living space where there was a desk with a computer that had 2 screens attached to it. He went around the desk and took a seat behind the screens. "Can you give me the number?" he asked me. "I'll find this bastard for you." "Sure." I left my own stool and walked over to where he sat. When I was standing beside him, I read the number off my phone. He began typing on the keyboard and his screens filled with lots of confusing information. Ian kept typing and scrolling. Apparently the stuff on the screen was clear to him. While he worked, I responded back to my client, confirming our 1 p.m. session for the following day. "God damn," he hissed. I looked up from my phone to see what he must be referring to. What I asked at the sight of him glaring at one of his screens, his nostrils flaring with anger once more, and his eyes bulging. "The person harassing you is using my computer. How the bloody hell did they manage to break my security?" Playing stupid, I gazed at the same screen he was looking at, but all the numbers and letters on it were like Greek to me. How's that possible? I truly was dying to know this. That's what I'm asking myself right now. I've never been hacked before my security is so good, but some bastard has managed to crack it. He sucked in a couple of deep breaths. "I think I know who it is." My eyes went to him now. "You do? Who?" "Someone from Adler. They're the only ones I know who are better at computer science than I am." I mentally rolled my eyes. Of course it would be someone like that, but at least I could rejoice in the fact that Ian wasn't behind those nasty texts after all. Of course, as soon as I left his place tonight, I'd touch base with George, make sure what Ian was telling me was plausible. Even if it sounded highly plausible that someone, not the Adler group, had hacked into Ian's computer and pretended to be him, it was always wise to verify. He turned to face me. "Did you ever realize these texts were coming from my computer?" "Let me correct. Seemed like they originated from my computer." When I didn't answer quickly enough, He nodded slowly. So you did think I had sent them to you then? You must have been terrified of me. Well, you can relax now. I can assure you that I would never do such a thing. Whoever helped you figure out the texts were sent from my computer should be able to confirm that they were only routed via my computer. Let's hope. I smiled to take the edge off my words. The smile came easily to me as I was truly grateful to have discovered Ian wasn't as psycho as I had feared. Then it faded as I thought of something. The question still remains why those texts were sent to me. For the same reason Felix Bose attacked you in Central Park. Adler wants to get rid of you without making it obvious, and by sending you these texts, they hope to get rid of me at the same time. I frowned, confused. How would you go away because someone texted me nasty messages? Because they know who you are, and that you'd eventually figure out they were sent, well, routed via my computer, the next logical step for you would be to try to eliminate me. His eyes, that had become a shade somewhere between blue and green now, narrowed slightly. Tell me, Gabi, how did you plan to kill me? You could easily have gotten away with it, the way you got away with killing Jeremy Perez. Not that he didn't deserve it. I blinked, a little shocked at the question. I didn't plan on killing you. A corner of his mouth went up in a wry smile. So you mean you'd have just put up with me harassing you and eventually trying to kill you? I don't believe that for a second. You're not that stupid or passive. You're a woman of action. I crossed my arms over my chest defensively. Okay, fine. I did think you were behind those texts, and I was thinking about the best way to deal with it. But I never once thought of killing you to make them stop. I never got that far. I guess I should be grateful you didn't, Ian commented dryly. I guess so. I checked the time on my smartphone. Past 10 already. I should get going. It's late. Ian nodded, looking deep in thought, and got to his feet. You're right, it's late. Thanks for bringing over the sushi. You're welcome. We walked to his small hallway together, neither of us saying a word. The magic between us from earlier was gone and replaced with slight tension, but not the sexy kind. As we stood in front of his front door, I was certainly not expecting a kiss, nor did I feel like receiving one. I'll see you in a couple of days, Ian said, and opened the door. Yes, I said, and exited his apartment. See you soon. Thanks for letting me read the report. You're welcome. He gave me a brief nod goodnight and disappeared into his place. As I descended the stairs down to the street, I thought of all that I had learned tonight. I was definitely relieved Ian wasn't behind those nasty texts after all. Plus, his explanation as to why they had been sent in the first place made more sense than I wanted to admit to myself. Chances were I would have tried to kill him eventually if the texts had kept coming, and they kept pointing to him. As a preemptive move. I wouldn't have just sat around waiting for him to finish me first. As I walked down Lexington Avenue, I called George to ask him what he thought of Ian's claims. He didn't pick up, so I had to leave a message. I stuck the phone back into my pocket and looked around for a cab. I wasn't in the mood to cross the park to get home this late at night. Even if it now seemed the person texting me was only trying to fuck with my head, I would still not be comfortable walking in the big park on my own when it was this dark out. Better not push my luck. There was a voicemail waiting for me when I woke up late the next morning. George had called me back while I was deep in La La Land and had my phone turned off. Yes, it's likely someone routed the texts through his computer, George's voice said in the voicemail. As always, go with your gut, kiddo. If you believe he's telling the truth and didn't send them, he probably didn't. I thought about George's words. What did I think of Ian's story now that I had slept on it? I rolled sideways on my bed as I tried to make up my mind. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I sighed. Only time would tell who was behind the texts. In the meantime, I'd better watch my back. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. What else was new? I pushed myself out of bed and got ready for a new day. It only started to get interesting as I got into the early evening and met the client I was taking over from another trainer. I could barely contain my shock as the two of us were doing her initial evaluation session. I had never before met a woman who had body fat levels under 12% and whose fitness goal was to get it even lower. You'd think she'd realize she was already skin and bones when she checked herself out in the mirror. Basically, the poor thing looked like she was a skeleton covered in tight skin. Truly, what she needed was not a trainer but a psychologist to set her head straight. "Eve," I said, gazing at the very slender 26-year-old blonde standing on the body fat scale, "your weight is dangerously low. You're almost 5'9" and weigh 110 pounds. Most runway models aren't that skinny." Eve looked at me with an outraged expression on her surprisingly round face. "That's not true. I can tell you about two who weigh less than me and are even taller." She stared at me, daring me to defy her. Eve was so skinny she was in danger of all kinds of health problems if I got her body fat even lower. The question was, how would I make her understand this? Besides, she continued, Sarah told me I could get my body fat down to 10% if I just worked out a little harder. I hate this fat. She grabbed the pale skin on her stomach and pulled it out in my direction. I obliged her by looking at it. "There's no fat there," I told her. "Only skin." "Yes, it is. If there wasn't, I'd be able to see my six-pack." That's what Sarah told me. I was so glad Sarah no longer worked for Nikki Sports Club. She was obviously crazy trying to make this young woman think she was fat when she was anything but. "You don't have the body type to get a six-pack," Eva explained. "But why would you want to? You have a great stomach. Women would kill to have a stomach like yours." Eve looked at me like I was crazy. "No, they wouldn't. I'm a fatty." Oh God, this girl so needed a therapist, and a few sandwiches with lots of mayo and cheese. I took a deep breath. "Listen, you're so skinny that you may die if you get any skinnier." She stared at me, even more outraged now. What a terrible thing to say. "I won't die if I get skinnier. Sarah is 9% body fat and she's still alive? Or are you telling me this machine is wrong?" Sarah went on it to show me her body fat levels. Eve jabbed with her thumb at the body fat scale she was still standing on. "Yes," I said, struggling to keep my voice calm. "Well, at least Sarah's body fat measurements must have been wrong. All the machine does is measure your hydration levels, so sometimes it's off. Please believe me when I'm telling you, Eve, you're already as lean as it humanly possible to be." To my surprise, Eve didn't fight me, just stepped off the scale and sank down on the chair. There was a vulnerable expression on her face. "Do you really mean that?" I looked at her, confused now. "What? That you're dangerously skinny?" "Yes. Am I really that skinny?" Her voice was tiny, like a little girl's. "I'm afraid that you are. What we should be focusing on is not to get you even skinnier, but stronger and gain more muscle." "Okay, yes, I'd like to get stronger." Her wide eyes moved slowly from one side to another, as though she was considering something. She frowned and met my gaze again. "Why did Sarah tell me my body fat levels were high then? That's why I thought I was so fat. Before I met her, I always thought I was too skinny, really." Eve pressed her red lips into a thin line. I should sue her. And Nikki for hiring someone like her. I shook my head, mad now. I couldn't believe Sarah had been telling this girl she was fat. Thank God she was no longer working for the club. In fact, she should not be a trainer at all. "I'm so sorry this happened to you, Eve," I said, "but at least now you're training with me, and you know that you're not fat after all." Eve exhaled, like a big weight had just been lifted off her shoulders. She smiled. Okay, thank you. You're welcome. We finished the evaluation and moved on to the workout. I went easy on Eve since she had barely eaten that day, thinking she was chubby. When our time together was over, we booked the next session for the following day, mostly because Eve had insisted, eager to get stronger. Eve didn't show up for her session the following evening. I called, texted, and emailed her to double-check that she was aware she had requested to train with me today, to be sure we hadn't misunderstood each other. I got no response. When 30 minutes had passed from the time we had decided to meet, I concluded she was not going to show at all, so I left the club to take a walk outside and get some fresh air. I had spent all day inside and was in dire need of it. By the time I was going to bed, I had still not heard from Eve. I wrote her off as a flake and switched off the light on my nightstand. In the morning, I turned on the news to see what was going on in the city. I almost dropped my tea when the anchor reported that a girl had been found murdered in an alley yesterday afternoon. A girl who had been identified as 26-year-old Eve Koch. 26-year-old Eve Koch, as in my new client. If I had any doubts it was really her, I didn't after they showed a photo of the girl. Was she all right? According to the reporter who was at the crime scene, Eve had been stabbed to death by a homeless drug addict with severe mental health problems. The bum had already been taken into custody after 2 eyewitnesses had identified him. I watched the story about Eve in its entirety and remained seated on the edge of my couch for a couple of minutes, still digesting what I had just learned. I felt terrible for what had happened to her, of course, but I also thought something about how she had died sounded off. How could she have bled to death on the street in the middle of the day? It seemed the 2 witnesses could have done more to save her. Eve had been stabbed 18 times, and from what it appeared, the couple had seen each and every one of those stabs, leaving little doubt who had committed the crime. I couldn't believe the man and the woman hadn't intervened, done something more than simply watch her being murdered. You'd think the man would have tried to pull the homeless druggie off Eve. How could you just stand by and watch while someone was butchered to death like that? They both claimed to have been too scared to do anything, and when they finally regained their ability to act, they had called 911. I sighed heavily. Maybe I was being too hard on the 2 witnesses. Sexist for thinking the man should have done more. They didn't have my training. They were merely civilians. I couldn't expect them to do more than they had, no matter how much I thought they should have. Realizing it was getting late, I stood up and finished getting dressed and then left for work. I was still shaken up about what had happened to Eve when I saw Ian for a session a few hours later. I hadn't seen or heard from him since I was at his place, and determined he wasn't behind the vile texts after all. Just to appease him, I'd gone through another 1,000 of the club's members in search of additional politicians. So far, Chatterley and the North Carolina senator were the only hits. "What's wrong?" he asked as he reached the top of the staircase where I waited for him. "My new client was stabbed to death yesterday," I replied morosely. He stared at me, taken aback. "Your client was stabbed to death? Who stabbed her?" "A crazy homeless guy. Yesterday, he was found passed out not far from the victim. There were 2 eyewitnesses to the incident, a man and a woman, so the perp has already been ID'd. The man and the woman were watching him as he stabbed her to death." He looked like he had a hard time swallowing those words. I smiled wryly. Funny that Ian would have the same reaction as I had at the sound of there being eyewitnesses to the actual incident, and he didn't even know how many times the perp had managed to stab her yet. I told him this when I confirmed he had heard me correctly. He smirked. Wow, it must have been a very daunting homeless man. Not really. Apparently he was fairly small, but I guess when you have a knife in your hand, you become a lot scarier. Ian nodded, looking pensive. That's certainly true. Still, I can't help but think they should have done something. The guy at least. So she was dead when help arrived then. That's what it sounded like from the developing story on Channel 1 this morning. Maybe you can check out the police report tonight, see what else is going on? Yeah, I will definitely take a look and see what they have to say about it. Something about it sounds fishy. It's tied up too neatly. We began climbing the stairs to the floor above us. As soon as we were quiet again, I sensed that something between us had shifted. I couldn't tell what, only that something was different. Was he mad at me for thinking he was the one behind the texts? Considering how cool he had been when I left his place, it was possible. Oh well, I thought. He'd get over it. I've gone through almost half the membership now, I said to lighten the mood. We reached the 5th floor landing and continued into the vast open area where all the heavy free weights, bench presses, and squat racks were, and used primarily by grunting males. And what did you find? Ian asked as I pointed to a seated row machine. I'd have him warm up by doing a long set of light rows. He took a seat on the bench while I adjusted the weight stack. So far, the only politicians of interest are Chatterley and the senator from North Carolina. Ian started pulling the machine's handles. You haven't found a single other person in the government here? Nope, not a single one. Interesting. Well, hopefully you'll find a few more as you go through the rest. Yeah, maybe. Now do a few stationary Spider-Men with torso twists. Have you seen either of them at the gym? Ian asked while turning his upper body toward me. Only Chatterley, that one time. But then again, I'm not sure I'd recognize the senator if I saw her in person. Do you want me to check if she's been here? That would be great. Okay, I'll check when we're done training. After Ian and I had finished, I went to the fitness desk to check on the senator and the governor. It turned out both of them had been at the club almost every day this past week. I made a mental note of telling Ian about it when he contacted me later to discuss the contents of the police report regarding Eve's murder. I received a call from him just when I got inside my apartment. Throwing my tote bag on the floor, I picked up and plopped down on the couch in my living room, beat from the hardcore workout I'd put myself through before leaving Nikki. I assume you got some news for me since you're calling, I said by way of greeting. I do. But that wasn't the only reason I chose to call instead of texting. I like listening to your voice. My stomach made a weird flip, not only because of what Ian had just said, but because of the intimate voice he'd used, too. I opted to ignore his comment, only noting that he must no longer be mad at me. You read the police report? I asked, making my own voice businesslike. Yeah, but I didn't learn much of interest. According to the NYPD, Eve Koch's murder is an open and shut case. I learned much more as I ran a search on her on my computer. Get this. She filed a lawsuit against the Adler Group only hours before the bum attacked her. What? Why would she do that? She has no reason to sue them, does she? Even as I asked Ian these questions, I heard Eve talking in my head. I should sue her. And Nikki for hiring someone like her. It's a personal injury suit, Ian explained. Her claim was that her life was at risk due to the trainer who used to train her. You mentioned she was a new client, so I assumed she was referring to her old trainer. Yeah, she must have. Wow, that's crazy. Well, maybe I shouldn't be that surprised. Now that I think about it, she did say something about wanting to sue them because of the bad advice she'd been given, and she was given bad advice. But I thought she was just mad and didn't really mean it. So she actually got a lawyer and had a lawsuit filed the very next day. She used the same lawyer she always uses. It's not the first time she's suing people or companies, so she knows how to get it done quickly. Really? How many times has she filed lawsuits? According to what I can see, 19 times? 19 times. Damn. Did she actually go to court for all of them? It looks like she went for most, and that she won them too. This girl likes to sue people. Ah, that's very interesting. I would never have guessed. She seemed kinda harmless when I had my initial session with her. Well, now you know. Isn't it interesting that she was killed only hours after her lawyer filed a lawsuit against the Adler Group? I guess. Then I got what he was getting at. No wonder he was so happy now. Wait, you're thinking Adler is really behind her murder? Come on. Absolutely they are. It makes perfect sense. Even you must agree with that. Just think about it a little. How often is a murder this easy to solve? Two eyewitnesses and the perp passes out half a block away from the victim, ready to be picked up by the authorities? It's all much too convenient, baby. Ignoring Ian's term of endearment, I bit the inside of my lip. Okay, yeah, it was a plausible theory, but I wasn't so sure it was much more than that. A theory. I told Ian this. Besides, I can't imagine Adler would be so stupid they'd have her killed right after being served. That would give them motive. They were never served. How do you know that? Her lawyer told me. What? You spoke to her lawyer? Yep, just got off the phone with her. How did you manage to convince her to give you that information? Isn't that confidential? Ian chuckled softly. Maybe, but by now you should have figured out that I would never let such a detail stop me from getting what I want. You told her you were from the FBI, didn't you? Of course. It's amazing how easily you get people to talk when you mention that. So you see, Adler and company already knew what your client was up to and chose to eliminate her before she'd given them a motive. Isn't that very interesting? As annoying as it was, I had to agree that it was.